Dear students, we are going to take a chapter named Weathering the Storm in Ersama. It is taken from the Moments. Please listen. Harsh Manter was born on 17th of April 1955. Is an Indian author, columnist, researcher, teacher, and social activist who works with survivors of mass violence and hunger, as well as homeless persons and street children. He is the director of the Center for Equity Studies. It's a research organization based in New Delhi. He also served as Special Commissioner to Supreme Court of India in the Right to Food campaign and was a member of the National Advisory Council of the Government of India. Mander formerly worked in the Indian Administrative Service, serving in the predominantly tribal states of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh for almost 2 decades. After Gujarat riots in 2002, Mander left the service and started social activism. He is a founding member of the National Campaign for the People's Right to Information. As a member of the core groups on bonded labor and mental hospitals for the statutory National Human Rights Commission of India, and also on various official national committees such as those for social protection and below poverty line, that is the BPL populations. From October 1999 to March 2004, he worked as a country director, Action Aid India, a development support organization. He is founder and chairperson of the State Health Resource Center, Chhattisgarh, which established the Mitanian Community Health Program, the forerunner of the ASHA program, and the chairperson of the Inclusion and Empowerment of People with Severe Mental Disorders. He is also a member of the working group of the Project on Armed Conflict Resolution of People's Rights, University of California, Berkeley. He was appointed a member of India's National Advisory Council by the Council President Sonia Gandhi in June 2010. He convened the working groups on the Food Security Bill, Land Acquisition and Rehabilitation Bill, Child Labor Abolition, Urban Poverty and Homelessness, Disability Rights, Bonded Labor, Street Vendors, and Urban Slums, and co-convened the groups on the Communal and Targeted Violence Bill, Dalits and Minorities and Tribal Rights, among others. His tenure was not renewed in 2012. Weathering the Storm in Ersama. Let us take the introduction. The story gives an account of the storm that hit the coastal town of Ersama in Odisha state in the year 1999. A young boy, Prashant, faced the fury of the storm and reached his village. The details of how he worked hard to help the villagers overcome the devastation caused by the storm inspire us to have courage and a positive approach towards life. On 27th October 1999, 7 years after his mother's death, Prashant had gone to the block headquarters of Ersama. It is a small town in coastal Odisha, some 18 kilometers from his village, to spend the day with a friend. In the evening, a dark and menacing storm quickly gathered. Winds beat against the houses with a speed and fury that Prashant had never witnessed before. Heavy and incessant rain filled the darkness. Ancient trees were uprooted and crashed to the earth. Screams rent the air as people and houses were swiftly washed away. The angry waters swirled into his friend's house and neck deep. The building was of brick and mortar. Mortar means it is a mixture of cement, lime, sand, and water. A mortar and was strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity of 350 kilometers per hour. But the cold terror of the family grew with the crashing of trees that had got uprooted and fallen on their house sometime in the middle of the night, damaging its roof and walls. Prashant was a native of a village in the coastal state of Odisha that we already understood. He was on a visited friend in Ersama, which is a small town in Odisha. The crazed destruction wrought by the cyclone and the surge of the ocean continued for the next 36 hours. Although wind speed had reduced somewhat by the next morning. To escape the waters rising in the house, Prashant and his friend's family had taken refuge on the roof. Prashant will never forget the shock he experienced at his first glimpse of the devastation wrought by the supercyclone in the grey light of the early morning. The storm continued for the next 1.5 days, although the wind had slowed down. To escape the rising levels of water, Prashant, along with his friend and his family, took shelter on the roof of the house. A raging, deadly brown sheet of water covered everything as far as the eye could see. Only fractured cement houses still stood in a few places. Bloated animal carcasses, that is, dead bodies, and human corpses floated in every direction. All round, even huge old trees had fallen. Two coconut trees had fallen on the roof of their house. This was a blessing in disguise because the tender coconuts from the trees kept the trapped family from starving in the several days that followed. As far as Prashant could see, he saw a cover of muddy brown water. There were the remains of shattered houses surrounded by the water. Dead bodies of animals and human beings floated in the water. For the next 2 days, Prashant sat huddled with his friend's family in the open on the rooftop. They froze in the cold and incessant rain. The rainwater washed away Prashant's tears. The only thought that flashed through his mind was whether his family had survived the fury of the supercyclone. Was he to be bereaved once again? 2 days later, which seemed to Prashant like 2 years, the rain ceased and the rain water slowly began to recede. Prashant was determined to seek out his family without further delay. But the situation was still dangerous, and his friend's family pleaded with Prashant to stay back a little while longer. But Prashant knew he had to go. He equipped himself with a long, sturdy stick and then started on his 18-kilometer expedition back to his village through the swollen floodwaters. It was a strange journey he would never forget. He constantly had to use his stick to locate the road to determine where the water was most shallow. At places it was waist deep and progress was very slow. At several points he lost the road and had to swim. After some distance he was relieved to find two friends of his uncle who were also returning to their village. They decided to move ahead together. As they waded through the waters, the scenes they witnessed grew more and more macabre. They had to push away many human bodies, men, women, children, and carcasses of dogs, goats, and cattle that the current swept against them as they moved ahead. In every village that they passed, they could barely see a house standing. Prashant now wept out loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. Eventually, Prashant reached his village, Kalikuda. His heart went cold. Where their home once stood, there were only remnants of its roof. Some of their belongings were caught, mangled, and twisted in the branches of trees just visible above the dark waters. Young Prashant decided to go to the Red Cross shelter to look for his family. When Prashant reached his village, Kalikuda, he became numb on seeing the remnants of his house. The belongings were scattered in the water, and some things hung on the branches of the trees just above the flood water. He decided to look for his family at the shelter set up by the Red Cross Society. At the Red Cross shelter, he saw his maternal grandmother. She appeared weak, but was glad to see that Prashant was alive. She refused to him with her arms open and her eyes full of tears. It was a miracle for her, as the family had thought that Prashant would not have survived the storm. As Prashant's extended family came to know that he had come, they gathered around him and hugged him in relief. Prashant saw that everyone was worried and injured. He met his siblings, uncles, and aunts. The next morning, Prashant realized that he had to get over his emotions and take charge of this situation. The huge crowd of around 2,500 people in the shelter was full of sadness, as they had lost everything in the storm. 86 people had been killed by the super cyclone. They had been at the shelter for the past 4 days. They had been eating raw coconuts, but now these were insufficient for the large number of people. Prashant, all of 19 years, decided to step in as leader of his village if no one else did. He organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. This time the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. No one cared that the rice was already rotting. Branches from fallen trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire on which to cook the rice. For the first time in 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to fill their bellies. His next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, and floating carcasses, and to tend to the wounds and features of the many who had been injured. Prashant, who was very young at the age of 19, decided to lead the crowd of distraught villagers. He formed a group of villagers, including the elders and the youth. The second task was the second task of the group was to clean the shelter. They removed the garbage, cleaned the excretory wastes, dead bodies, and tended the injured. On the fifth day after the super cyclone, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped food parcels. It did not return later, but they needed food. So the youth in the crowd gathered empty utensils. The children were made to lie in the sand with the utensils on their stomachs to indicate to the passing helicopters that they needed food. The helicopters got the message and returned with food and other necessities for the crowd at the shelter. A large number of children had been orphaned in the super cyclone. Prashant put them together, under a polythene sheet. The women in the shelter were deployed to look after the children, and the men arranged food for everyone. The sadness of the children and women in the shelter was growing with each passing day. Prashant requested to work in the NGO called Food for Work. In order to keep the children busy, he organized sports events for them. He took help of other volunteers to help the widows and orphans to return to normal lives. The government had proposed to set up separate institutions for widows and orphans, but this proposal was successfully rejected by Prashad. He felt that these separate institutions would neither help the orphan children nor would they be beneficial for the widows. These volunteers wanted to settle the orphan children and widows in foster families where they would get love and security. After 6 months of the disaster, Prashant has come out of the grief of losing his mother because he was engrossed in helping others that he forgot his pain. All the widows and orphans looked up to him in their time of grief, and so he learned to come out of his gloom and smile.